Thank you everybody for coming today. I know I'm preaching mostly to the choir, but we're going to talk about some stuff anyway. So thanks for coming to today's forum. The candidates that we have here are vying to represent the state's House District 69, which we are in right here. We have Republican Adam Koenig and Democrat Col Owens. Thank you both for coming today. Before I hand it over to these students, I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing here. Why are we here in the middle of a school with the political candidates? Is this a class? Is this a political event? What is it? The answer is that it is both. One of the things here at Imagineering Academy, and as we prepare for Ignite, that we believe in strongly is authentic project-based learning. So I want to talk about a few aspects of that as they relate to this project and these students. One good thing about the project-based learning is they learn the material better. I can guarantee you that these 6 students have learned more about state government and elections and taxes and revenue and infrastructure and education funding in a deeper way than they would have in any other way of learning. Another part is they're just more motivated. It's very motivating when you know that you're going to be here with all these cameras around and microphone in your hand and a bunch of people looking at you. You better know what you're doing. And I'm very proud of the fact that these students have worked very hard to know what they're doing and be ready for today. And thirdly, beyond the content, they learn a lot of other skills. So this is a government class. We're learning about the government, of course. But just while doing that, the things that they've had to do, they learned how to write a press release and get it covered. They wrote professional emails to invite these candidates to be here. They collaborated in big groups and partners during this project. They interpreted data when they were writing their questions. They're obviously working on their public speaking. And my favorite aspect is, we have people on the left and the right in class, even with a small group. We get into some heated discussions, but they are very good, especially when I remind them to prove it. Show me numbers. So they back up their claims with evidence, and they know what they're talking about. So with all that being said, this is a day and an event for these 2 candidates to get their word out, and for these students. So I would appreciate the audience if you'll remain quiet throughout the event so that we can hear what the important people have to say. And with that, I will remain quiet for the rest of the event. I'm just going to introduce the students. We have Jordan Wagner, Aiden Sumner, Darius Klein, Elena McEwen, Hannah Walters, and our moderator today, Daniel Kaiser.
All right. As Mr. Smith said, thank you all for coming. Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and jump into the format of today's debate. Each candidate will have 3 minutes for their opening statement. There's going to be 8 questions in total, and it's going to alternate who goes first with each question. They have 3 minutes to answer, and if the candidate chooses to do so, there is an optional 1-minute rebuttal, and then there will be a 3-minute closing statement at the end. So jump right into our first question. It involves the opioid epidemic and will be asked by Elena McEwen.
The opioid epidemic has been particularly rampant in our state of Kentucky, claiming nearly 1,000 victims in 2016 alone, according to the NIH. Many people have been approaching this with the stance of treating drug abuse as a disorder or a mental health problem rather than a crime. The Kent County Jail has expanded its drug rehab program, and nearly 80% of those in the program found employment afterwards. Do you believe that this is effective, or do you feel that there might be some extra steps that are needed to be taken in order to contain this problem?
Which one of us would you like to go first?
Representative Koenig.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, and first of all, thanks for putting this event on. It's a great event, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you all. I would have loved to have been able to do something like you're doing here today when I was in high school. So congratulations on all your hard work and getting all these folks here. On that, first of all, I appreciate the question. The opioid epidemic has been a serious scourge throughout not just northern Kentucky, but through Kentucky. We in the state legislature have tried to do what we can to eliminate or mitigate as best we can a lot of the issues. One of the primary things we did was sponsored by Representative Mosier from Southern Kenton County, who is a nurse, and I trust her judgment on many of these issues. She was also head of the Northern Kentucky Drug Strike Force, which was cut back initial prescriptions for opioids to 3 days instead of having something that shouldn't take that long, but you get 30 days worth of prescription opioids. That didn't make any sense. We've cut that back, and I think it's showing some progress. There's only so much, unfortunately, that government can do, but I'm glad you talked about what the Kent County Jail is doing, because they have come up with a system that seems to be a model for the nation. And I know Terry Carl, who's a good friend of mine. I was a Kent County Commissioner, and he and I got elected together in 1998, a long time ago. And he's still there doing a great job along with Judge Knockelman. And they are, like you said, producing people who are hopefully getting clean, getting straightened out, and getting employment is a vital part of that. If you can get folks employed, and certainly the economy is at a point right now where just about anybody who wants a job can have one, and we'll talk about that more, I'm sure, but if you can get them in employment, if you can get them their life stabilized, they're much less likely to go back to that lifestyle. So it's something that I know that Kent County is exporting, talking to other counties in Kentucky, and frankly other jail systems throughout the nation. And I think we need more of that. We need more discussions as to what we can do to help people get straightened out, because what we've been doing has not been working. Just warehousing people is not working, and any innovative ideas we're up for trying.
Sean? Good. Well, good afternoon, folks, and especially to you students. And I'll echo what Adam said about what a great opportunity this is for us to be here with you, and I think for you to be able to hear from people like us who are out there actively seeking to be in government and seeking to represent you and your issues and your concerns in government. So thank you for being here. Thank you for creating this opportunity. And thank you particularly to you students who have put together these questions. I had an opportunity to scan a couple of them. They're very thoughtful, as this one is, and it shows that you've done some real good work, some good homework to prepare for this. The opioid crisis is absolutely a real scourge in our community. I will echo a couple of things Adam said. For one thing, the Kenton County Jail approach, and I believe always in giving credit where it's due, regardless of where it falls on the partisan divide. But I think Judge Knockelman has done a tremendous job with the rest of county government in taking the approach that they take, which is to treat and to try to prepare people to get fit, get clean, and then to re-enter society. I would like to focus a little bit, I think that's entirely appropriate. I think that we need to talk about prevention and look more seriously at why are people getting into this. One reason has already been alluded to is the prescription of opioids. And that obviously needs to be regulated. I think they took a good first step with this 3-day prescription limit. And I support that. I support more regulation of doctors who abuse prescriptions for whatever reasons and in whatever ways. So I think that the medical profession needs to be more active in policing and regulating its own members in that regard. I also believe that we have to look at what drives people to self-medicate, is what I'm a legal aid lawyer by background. We didn't get to introduce ourselves, but I spent a career as a legal aid lawyer, and I dealt with a whole lot of people who had lots of problems, who were low income, and for lots of different reasons. But I can tell you, when people self-medicate or start taking drugs, there's a lot of reasons. A lot of times it has to do with frustration, with their life, particularly economically, when they don't have enough money and they're not able to stabilize their families and work on getting ahead in life. They're barely making it in life. So I think, and we'll get into this later, I'm sure, we have to look at the economic circumstances of people, which have been very tough, especially people who work for a living, to be able to do a better job of prevention in this arena.
Thank you for your answers. Our next question involves the teacher pensions, and that's going to be asked by Hannah Walters. not just teacher pensions, but public employee pensions.
Back in March of 2018, the Kentucky pension reform was passed, but a lawsuit has been tied up in court since then. To summarize, the bill stated that new teachers have to have served 27 years to be eligible for retirement, cannot contribute unused sick days to the retirement plan, and still do not get Social Security. Whether the law is upheld or not, the state still does not have enough funding for the teacher and state worker pensions. How should the government weigh its responsibilities to the public workers with its responsibilities to taxpayers?
Mr. Owens, we're going to start with you this time.
Okay. Well, I think the clear message is that with respect to the last part of the question, I don't think the General Assembly did uphold its obligations to the public workers. There is enough money in the system to pay the ARC each year, what's called the actuarially referred or recommended contribution to pay for pensions and over a period of years to stabilize those pensions. What's happened is that they took away, this gets a little wonky, folks. They took away a defined benefit pension from new hires and kept that only for present retirees and teachers who are teaching. I think they can do more than that. Economists have said that if the so-called ARC is paid each year, then they can, over a period of years, stabilize the pension system. I'm going to talk in a few minutes about where that money comes from. But that money can be put into it and will stabilize pensions, not only for present hires, but new hires. Several years ago, with hazardous duty people, they took away the defined benefit pension, and we've seen the impact of that, excuse me, particularly with fire people. 400 people used to take the fire test in order to try to get a fire person's job, and this year 60 people did. So we've seen that changing that pension has a dramatically negative effect on future hires, and I'm very concerned about that for education. I think the second thing I want to say very quickly about this is when you create a class of people who are not feeding into the system, which the new hires would be, you're really creating two problems. One is their pensions or retirement security is far less secure. And secondly, they're not paying into the system. So at the same time they're not getting a secure benefit, they're undermining other people's pensions because the money isn't coming into the system that should be. So I think this needs to be revisited, whatever the court decides. And I think that we need to revert to defined benefit pensions for everybody, and I think we can do that, but simply by paying the ARC each year. Thank you.
Well, folks, it's simple to say, well, we'll just pay the ARC each year. I've been in for 12 years, and this year we did pay the actuarially required contribution for 7 of the 8 systems, except for our own, the legislators and judicial retirement. We took that money and put it to the state police retirement system because it's in desperate shape, as is a few others. It's easy to say the money's there, but as I said, in my 12 years, we have cut many, many parts of state government. And that's because we can't afford the pension system that we have. The only things we've added money to over the last decade are pensions. This year, just a small increase in SEEK, but an increase and record high funding for that. Jails, going back to the last question, and Medicaid expansion. Everything else in state government has been cut so that we can continue to try to pay for these pensions. And look, I'm in the pension system. Your teachers are in the pension system. My brother Alex is a teacher at Dixie. He's in the pension system. I want to make sure that the promises that have been made are kept. However, we have a $43 billion hole in our pension system. Again, I'm going to get wonky too. $43 billion, that's almost 4 times our annual budget. That is not sustainable. We have a state police system where there is, for every dollar we pay to a state police officer in salary, we have to pay $1.42 into the pension system to maintain the promises that have been made. That's not sustainable. That's the worst of them, but they're all trending in that direction. Some of them, I think we pay 40 cents. Some of the other ones, I think we pay 90 cents. And if we are going to ever be able to reinvest in education without taxing people enormously, we have to make changes. And we started those changes in 2013. And as of July 1st, 2014, all new public employees, except for teachers, are going into this hybrid cash balance plan, which is, this is wonky, technically a defined benefit plan because we define the benefits that you can't lose. And so it's important, and this is important for all you students to hang with me and listen to. For years and years, it was two-year budget, let's just get through this, we'll fix it next year. Well, that's how you get to a $43 billion hole. We are biting the bullet. Now, when I say we, I mean the new Republican majority. We are biting the bullet and trying to fix it long-term so that all of you, when you get to be our age, which is different, but if you get to be, when you get to be our age, you're not saddled with this debt. By the time you all get to be my age, we should be on the downhill slide and we should have this under control if these changes we make take place and we continue to fund the ARC, which will be reasonable. I've probably gone over my 3 minutes, haven't I? You gotta be tough, moderator.
Mr. Owens, you want to rebuttal?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Let's get to the crux of this, and it is money. One of the things that the legislature did this past time was give a huge tax break to the wealthiest Kentuckians that arguably they didn't need, while increasing taxes on lower income Kentuckians. That, if people are looking for money, that's not a good strategy for finding money to put to necessary public uses. Secondly, probably 15 years ago, about the time the Senate flipped, in other words, the Senate turned from Democrat to Republican in the early 2000s, a noted tax expert came into Kentucky, a guy named Bill Fox, and did a very deep study of our tax system and said basically in conclusion, you have what's called a serious structural deficit. That kind of sounds a little wonky, but what it means simply is you're not going to get enough money out of your tax structure as it's presently put together to pay your legal obligations, statutory or constitutional or both. Now, what's happened since then has been that once the Senate turned Republican, they just set into motion with gridlock and blocked every attempt to do tax reform that would address that structural deficit. So it's more complicated than it sounds, and Adam made it sound to say we don't have the money to address this. We can have the money to address this if we do tax reform, and I will talk about that in a few minutes. Thank you.
Would you like to rebuttal that?
I don't think that's in the rules, but we'll talk about it some when we get to the taxes revenue question.
Our next question involves school security and gun control. That's going to be asked by Jordan Wagner.
As of May 2018, there has been 23 school shootings across the U.S., according to CNN. Consequently, 26 students have died due to these brutal and avoidable attacks. 2 school shootings have taken place in Kentucky just this year. In order to try and prevent that from happening here, Boone County schools have implemented an SRO in every school. How will you work to keep Kentucky's youth safe from gun violence? Do you believe Army teachers will help keep students and staff, employees safer?
Thank you for the question. I know it's obviously a very important issue that we are trying to address. Couple things. First of all, the chairman of the committee that writes the budget came to me during session this year and asked me, do you need anything in the budget? And the only thing I said to him was, we need more money for the Safe Schools program. And it was, I think this budget was tripled, something like that, this year, because that's important. We need to address that. There are policies and procedures that if schools learn about and follow, they can do wonders in eliminating any problems. And I won't get into the details of what Safe Schools do, but my friend Lucy Riffle, who lives in Erlanger, is one of the two people that go to schools and teach them what they can do, and what they can, how they can act, and how they can make sure that these problems don't come to those schools. So that's important. And there's the legislature, the House and Senate have set up a Safe Schools task force, and they are having hearings across the state. They are taking input on what some of the best practices are and what we can do to improve that situation, make it better, make schools a place of learning rather than fear. So we're working on it. We're working on it actively. It's an important issue that I look forward to seeing what they come out with, and I'm sure I can probably support what they come out with.
Well, I think the immediate question is, let me start off by saying the last time I was in this room was a school board meeting, and I think there were about 500 people in the room. And the topic that night, some of you may have been here back several months, was, should we have guns in schools? Should teachers be armed? And the overwhelming sentiment about that question, which really I think is the one that this question gets to, is it's not a good idea. And most people don't want it, and most teachers don't want it. The SRO approach makes a lot of sense. I was on a school board in Covington for many years when I lived there before I moved to Fort Mitchell and to this district. And we had SROs and in the school at Holmes High School there, and they were great to work with. They were prepared to deal with things because that was their profession. That was their training. That they had the ability to deal with situations that most teachers do not, and frankly, do not want to have. They're in the classroom because they want to teach, not because they want to be an armed guard. So I think the answer to this issue is not to arm teachers. I think the answer is to have SROs. Now, I had an interesting dialogue with the student member of the school board that night. I asked him what he thought about that, and he said, well, you know, he said, we here in Boone County are pretty well funded. I mean, we're a fairly affluent community across the board. We have money where we can afford this for every school, for every school in the district. But he said, there's districts in the state, I certainly know this to be true because of some of my former experiences in other communities that do not have those monies. And that's where I think the state can step in and do more to help school districts that are struggling be able to afford this kind of resource. I mean, districts are struggling now, and I'm sure we're going to get into education in a few minutes, just to provide textbooks, to provide supplies, to provide transportation, to provide support services to families. So this is not going to be a high priority for districts that are really struggling to meet those basic needs in their district. So I think the answer is we need to have people in the districts who understand and can be a resource for this, but I think they are going to be extraordinary to the school system, not the teachers. Thank you.
And let me take my 1 minute here to say that it's actually a little known fact that local school districts have the option of arming their teachers. And I believe it was Pike County who voted either late last year or early this year to go forward with that. And after they investigated it further, they decided that that was not a good choice, and they chose not to do that. But it's something that local school districts have the option of. I'm a fan of allowing local school districts to have more flexibility on a range of issues, and you know, every district may be different.
Thank you. Our next question involves jobs. I will be asked by Aiden Sumner.
The unemployment rate in Kentucky is currently around 4%, but the unemployment rate for 16 to 24-year-olds is 9.9%. With the job market changing rapidly due to many factors, what can the government do to make sure there are good jobs and careers available to young people so they can earn a living wage?
I believe I start with that. Well, I think it's important to acknowledge several things as we get into this issue. We do have an extraordinarily low unemployment rate, and that's something to celebrate. But it is ironic and a bit perplexing that while we have an unemployment rate below 4%, we have a poverty rate of 18.5%. And we have a lot of people, statistics about this district, about 25% of the households in the 69th House District have incomes below $15,000. And that surprises a lot of people when I say that. That's below the poverty level. But people are working. So what the clear message is, people are working, which is what everybody in the United States of America wants people to do. It's good for them, it's good for their family, it's good for their self-worth, it's good for being able to put food on the table and meet their family's needs to stabilize, to have a sense of identity. Jobs and work are extremely important, but if work doesn't pay enough, then you're not really getting ahead. And there's a lot of economic data, I'm not going to get too wonky here, that suggests that for all of the great economic growth that we've had, and I'm all for economic growth, the benefits of it are not spreading across all Kentuckians. They're kind of all going up to the people at the top, and people at the bottom their incomes have been very stagnant for a long time. So I think it's great to have low unemployment. That is a great thing. But I think we need to look very carefully at how lower income people who work full time at a legal job and work just as hard as any of the rest of us, that are making $7.25 an hour. I think we need to increase the minimum wage. I think it will help people move toward a more stable or more livable wage who are working and who then can kind of, several things can come out of that. Number one, they do better economically, and that feels better, and there's less anger out there and less frustration, less propensity to do drugs or to take out your anger on other people, which goes back to the shootings as well as things like domestic violence. Again, as a legal aid lawyer, saw a lot of that for a long time. So it's important. This is not dreary economics. It's really humanly important that we pay attention to people who work, that they actually get somewhere with it.
There's much we can do without having the government set the rate of pay. We have a booming economy, lowest unemployment rate since we started keeping track of it 42 years ago. And in conjunction with that, when everyone has a job and there are more people in America, there's more jobs available than there are people looking for jobs. Obviously, if you're going to get qualified people, that's when wages start going up. And we are seeing that in Kentucky. The Bureau of Economic Analysis, I believe it is, has shown that in the first quarter in Kentucky, income went up on an annualized basis of 5.5%. In the second quarter, I believe it was 5.7%. We were in the top 4 in both quarters, and we were the only state in America in the top 4 in both quarters. So wages are going up, and that's what happens when you have a booming economy. So what can we do? Kentucky has not done a very good job in the past of making sure that we encourage people to get the trades, and we're trying to fix that. The governor's done a great job of emphasizing that. We are changing a lot of our focus to make sure that people are getting trained and training is available for the jobs that we need. STEM is important. It's something that everyone needs, but you know what? I can't fix my air conditioner. I can't fix my furnace. I can't fix my dishwasher. That's why I'm doing dishes by hand right now. So we need those people. I talked to a young man, I don't think he might have been 24. He's a pipe fitter. And he doesn't live in the district. He was at his parents' house when I knocked on that door. But he said he would vote for me because things are so great. There's 1,800 guys in his union, and he said there were 8 people on the bench, meaning 1,792 of the 1,800 had a job to go to every single day because things are moving. That's how we get wages up. That's how we get everyone employed and happy, is to have an economy that's booming. And how do we have an economy that's booming? We get government out of the way. We pass good legislation like we have the last couple of years in making this a right-to-work state, repealing prevailing wage. I'm getting my opponent all excited by saying all this. And paycheck protection and good policies like that, eliminating regulations, eliminating red tape, and letting businesses do what they do, which is hopefully make money, create jobs for everyone else.
Thank you. Do you want to respond?
Yes, please. I would say this, I would say several things. First of
We
all,
only have a minute to do that.
I talk to a lot of people. I've been around thousands of doors, quote unquote, meaning talking to people out in the communities. And I haven't found people who feel so great about repealing the prevailing wage. In fact, one school district administrator told me that in a project they had in one of their schools, people had thought that eliminating the prevailing wage would make it a cheaper project. In fact, it made it more expensive because the people who were doing the work were less reliable and show up. They didn't do as good a quality of work when they were there, and it wound up costing more, not less. I think if we're trying to build the economic base of our communities, and I do worry about people at the bottom, if we want to do that, doing things like eliminating the prevailing wage, which cuts wages for a lot of people, cuts their incomes pretty dramatically, refusing to increase the minimum wage. Let me just finish my, okay, all right. These are not good policies. Sorry.
Our next question involves criminal justice reform, and that'll be asked by Darius Klein.
Me?
Kentucky jails and prisons face a problem with overcrowding. One possible solution is to build more prisons or to allow private prisons. House Bill 396 would have lowered inmate populations by changing some felonies to misdemeanors, requiring pretrial release for some charges, and requiring parole at the first eligibility. Do you think in general that the solution to overcrowding is to create more capacity or to incarcerate fewer people?
There's a lot to unpack with that topic. Look, 20 years ago I got elected Kenton County Commissioner. We had an overcrowded jail then. We built the new jail that we talked about earlier. It's full. There never seems to be enough space. We passed laws in the 12 years I've been in Frankfurt that we're supposed to, we're guaranteed with policies that have worked in other states to lower our incarceration rates. That hasn't happened either. One thing I'm particularly excited about is an initiative that was brought to Kentucky over the summer called 3 Days Matter. We have our local jails full of people who can't meet bond but are of very little risk to not show up to court. And if they can't make bond, they sit there and they're taking up space, they're costing all of us money. And if there's someone who has a job, they've lost the job because they're not going to it, there might be children who are without a parent in that time. And I think that has a lot of potential of seriously lowering our incarceration rates. We've lowered punishment for a lot of folks and like I said, it hasn't lowered our incarceration rate, and I don't know that it's done much else positive so far. So I don't know, I've tried it. It's not something that personally I was excited about when we first did it. But I was willing to go along with it because the experts told us it would work and people I trusted told us it would work, and it hasn't. Doesn't mean doing more of it won't work, but I'm just much more skeptical than I was before. I would rather try things like this 3-Day Matters program and see if it works before we start with a wholesale lowering of things from felonies to misdemeanors.
Well, I think that House Bill 396 had a lot of good provisions, and it's unfortunate that it didn't pass. We do need to do several things in criminal justice reform. We incarcerate so many more people in our society than virtually any other society in the world. The needs are for redefining a lot of criminal offenses, from felonies to misdemeanors, especially those that are involved no violence, no physical violence or anything like that. We need to do sentencing reform. Our sentencing laws are very, very onerous. And I know that's controversial. Judges like to have quote-unquote discretion, but it seems like oftentimes discretion means you go to the most extreme possible. So I think we need sentencing reform, we need crime or offense redefinition, and we do need bail reform. I mean, for many people, bail is simply being in jail for no offense at all, other than being poor. It's a poverty sentence. And so we deal more effectively with parole sorts of solutions, and less that keeps people in jail for no reason. I'm a strong supporter of this. I think we waste both a lot of human lives in this kind of system, and there's evidence of that all over the place. We're also wasting an extraordinary amount of money. It takes a lot of money to incarcerate somebody, a lot less money to deal with out-of-prison sentence systems. So I believe strongly in criminal justice reform, and I hope that it will come in Kentucky. I would work for it.
Representative Koenig, do you want to respond to that?
I think we've covered it. Thank you.
Our next question involves Kentucky education funding, and that will be asked by Hannah Walters.
In the most recent state budget, the funding per student was increased to $4,000, but there were deep cuts made to other areas. For example, there are no funds for teacher professional development or textbooks. You boasted on your website how it's important to have a well-educated workforce and provide more support for our children. We chose to come to this school and be a part of Ignite Institute because of the opportunities that it gives us, but these new programs cost money. How would you make sure that the education is funded so that every student has access to the education that they need?
Okay, that's to me. Well, let me begin by saying education is the most important thing that state government does, and local government too. But it is the most important issue area and the most important enterprise that we undertake. I mentioned earlier, I'll just allude to it, that over the last 15 years, because of the gridlock in government, we've not had the education funding that we've needed. I've watched a slow, what I call disinvestment in education. Most of you, at least among the students, were not around when education reform was taking place in Kentucky. Back to the big lawsuit, the Rose versus Council lawsuit in the late 1980s, which led to the adoption of Kentucky Education Reform Act in the early 90s. And I watched as a school board member for 16 years in Covington that play out, and what a great difference it made during the time period when it was being adequately funded. And we dropped from, 49th, thank God for Mississippi, about everything, down to, climbed up, I should say, into the mid-30s in a lot of our educational measures. But in recent years, that has been not only stopped, but inverted. And I've seen data which show that the disparities between the capacities of local school systems to fund themselves has grown back to virtually the same gap that existed before the Rose litigation. That is, it's just as bad as it was when they first brought this constitutional claim. So I suspect that among other things, there may be some litigation around education funding in the future. We need to do a better job, and we can do a better job. I said earlier, it takes meaningful tax reform. And what is that? In my judgment, a flat income tax is not a solution. Somebody who makes $15,000 a year is paying the same tax rate as somebody that makes $15 million a year. That is just simply unjust, and it's unwise, because those people at the bottom don't have the funds they need to stabilize their own lives and to do what they want to do in the community. And the people above, I mean, how much do they need? They've got a lot. So I think what the tradition in this country for 100 years has been to have a graduated income tax. That's from the beginning up until the present. It's the backbone of the federal system. The system tracks people's ability to pay, and those who can pay more should pay more. The other thing about this that is so pernicious, so concerning, is that an Institute for Taxation and Economic Theory that exists out there, ITAP, which is highly regarded and not left or right, has shown with data demonstrably that lower income people pay a much larger percentage of their income in taxes than higher income people. That's not how it should work. It should be the opposite. So that's a long way a long preface to saying I would revisit the issue of what the income tax should look like. It's the fairest tax out there. I'd also revisit sales taxes, but I'm out of time. I'll come back to that.
Mr. Rose.
Thank you.
First of all, excellent use of the word pernicious. Well done.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So yes, we were proud to fund education at record levels this year. It's been a long time coming, and not to be overly partisan, but you know, the previous 4 budgets, 8 years, yes, there was a Republican Senate, but there was a Democratic House and a Democratic governor. And when you talk about the disinvestment that's happened, I guess you could say is bipartisan, but Democrats controlled a whole lot more of the levers than Republicans did in Frankfurt. And Republicans are generally associated with lower taxes. Well, we came in and we raised taxes $400 million in order to fund education, in order to be able to pay our pensions. And when you find $1 billion in new money for teacher pensions alone, I consider that to be education funding. We have a $21 billion budget, and we found $1 billion for teacher funding. That's a lot of money. So I'm not embarrassed by what we've done. I'm proud of what we've done to fund education. You know, we have more to do, but we have more to do in a lot of areas. We have social workers who don't make nearly enough money. We have state troopers driving cars with 250,000 miles on them. Those are just some of the examples. We have a lot of investment that we need to make. Now, how are we going to pay for that? Well, we're trying to grow the economy, and we are growing the economy. Again, through the policies that I've mentioned, cutting red tape, right to work, investment in people and our students, and you know, we're having a lot of success. We're getting record amounts of money into our coffers in Frankfurt. I would rather grow the economy and generate the money that way rather than taxing everyone into oblivion. Because it's nice to say that, you know, we should tax the rich more. They already pay the large portion of the tax bill, first of all. And second of all, if you tax those corporations and those people more, they're going to leave the state. That's the way the system works. The states that are succeeding have great deals of increases in businesses and in people and in revenues are states like Texas and Florida and Tennessee, who've eliminated their income tax altogether and have a consumption tax. They're the ones that are succeeding. They're the ones that are actually able to invest more in education because of those tax policies.
Thank you, Mr. Owens.
Yes, several points. There may be record levels in actual dollars this year, but over the last decade, we've lost 16%. The amount of funding per pupil in education is 16% lower than it was a decade ago. So you have to be careful that that's taking inflation into account about how these numbers are used. The issue of who pays is huge. Consumption taxes in Tennessee, the sales tax is 9.5%. Economists have said that for Kentucky to achieve its needed income without an income tax, you'd have a sales tax of 16%. Well, you know, lower income people do not have the capacity, they do not have a lot of discretion about whether to pay the heat bill, for example, or not, or whether to buy a lot of things that they must have, whether it's tires for the car, shoes for the kids, whatever it is. There's very little discretionary decision making that goes on there. There's huge discretion at the top level. It's not, some sort of philosophical thing. It's a matter of what actually works economically. Think back to the Eisenhower era. We had a tax rate, an effective tax rate of 90%. People didn't complain because society worked for everybody. Well, we don't have that today. It's not working for everybody. Thank you.
Our next question involves taxes and revenue and will be asked by Elena McEwen.
Earlier this year, Kentucky House Bill 366 was passed. This bill lowers income taxes and taxes pensions over $41,000 a year. It also taxes goods and services that were previously taxed, such as taking a pet to the veterinarian, and it increases the cigarette tax. What effects do you see those changes having on Kentucky citizens, and do you think that we should explore other sources of revenue, such as legalized gambling or marijuana?
Thanks for that question. It's having very positive effects. And again, we can see it in the booming economy. We lowered the income tax rate. We are broadening the base by eliminating some of the deductions that my opponent doesn't like. And you know what? We'll get rid of all those deductions he doesn't like when we get rid of the income tax. And to do that, we will have to extend the tax to services, and we have been dealing with a 1950s tax structure that taxed things and not services. We live in a service-based economy now, okay? And this is the big difference between my opponent and I, and it's a big difference between the parties in Frankfurt. The Democrats have kept things status quo for years, okay? And we have been at the bottom of every list you want to be at the top of, and the top of every list you want to be at the bottom of. And Republicans have come in, and we are changing the status quo. We are trying to move this economy, and it's working. Our policies are working. There's more people working. They're making more money. And that's how we're going to hopefully get out of this deficit. I'd love to see the study that says 16% would have to be the income tax, or the sales tax. I've not heard that. It sounds a little bit like fear-mongering to me. That's not the case. We would not do that if that's what the results would be. We are trying to change the way Kentucky's been run, and I don't think anyone here can say that Kentucky look, 40 years ago, Tennessee and Kentucky had the same population. Now, Tennessee has 50% more people than Kentucky. All right? We've lost that battle over the years. We want to start winning that battle. All right? We want this to be a place where you want to come and live and work and raise a family. And these policies will help do that. They're helping do that right now. to get to the last part of that, I have been a strong advocate for expanded gambling in my time in Frankfurt, all 12 years. When I was in the minority and Democrats ran expanded gambling bills, I voted for them every time. Unfortunately, I had an expanded gambling bill the last 2 years about fantasy sports, DraftKings and FanDuel, to legalize them and to generate some money. I got 2 House Democrats to vote for it. They could not, unfortunately, extend that same courtesy to me and be bipartisan when they had the opportunity, when I voted for every one of their expanded gambling bills, because that's what I believed to be right, even though my party generally was against it. So that's disappointing. And that's something that everyone, I think, needs to remember, whether you live in the 69th district or not, is that we need people who will do what they think is right, not what their party tells them to do.
Thank you, Representative. Mr. Owens?
Yes, well, the 16%, by the way, was simply the difference in funding. It had nothing to do with the tax per se. I don't want to repeat what I said before. Income taxes are the fairest tax. Consumption taxes are terribly regressive. They work hardest on the people with the least ability to pay. Let's be clear about that, whether they're on goods or services. It is interesting, I would say pernicious, that when you take your little dog to the vet, you pay a tax. But when Adam takes his racehorse to the vet, there's no tax. So, sorry, Adam.
Sorry. I wish I had one. I wish I had the money to have it.
So there are those kinds of differences. I am not opposed to taxing services at all. I think we have to tax services. We are increasingly a service-oriented economy. But you have to look at whose services get taxed. I haven't seen legal services get taxed. I haven't seen medical services get taxed. I haven't seen realtors' services get taxed. And other very large and heavyweight, powerful constituencies. We need to be thoughtful. I believe that with the sales tax, as with the income tax, that ought to track ability to pay, and we should look to services that higher income people who are exercising discretion that they use to look for things that will provide revenue rather than those which fall on the least able to pay. And I have to tell you, regardless of what Adam says, and the economy may look great, but I'm telling you, when I go to the doors, I'm hearing from people that don't think it's so great. It's not been great for them, and that they don't like the taxes that they now have to pay. The charitable sector is nuts about the taxes they have to pay on their events. So I think there's a lot of things to be fixed here. Cigarette tax, I support. For several reasons. It brings in revenue. Also, it deters youth smoking, and I think that's a laudable thing, and it should be pursued more. I too support, and I actually agree on legalizing gambling. I've always thought that that's something we should do. Unfortunately, at this point in time, we're kind of late to the game with what other states, Indiana and Ohio, have done. So. And as far as marijuana is concerned, I think if it is legalized, and my suspicion is it will be, and not too far into the future, certainly for medical use and perhaps for recreational use, I think on that point we should look at other states' experiences very carefully about what happens there where it's been legalized before we would even get into that. But does it get legalized? Yes, it should be taxed. I think taxing things like sin, quote unquote, gambling, smoking, drinking, what have you, is good. It's not a consistent tax structure that's going to serve you over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Owens.
Let me just say that with regards to the extension to services to some, or extension of the sales tax to some services, this was a first step. We lowered the income tax rate from either 5.8 or 6%, depending on how much you were paying, to 5% for everyone. Same with the corporate rate. And we started extending the services. And there was a reason we chose the services we did, and I can bore you with that later if you like to stick around. But that's not all of it. You know, we will get to realtors, we will get to attorneys, and the other services as we continue to lower the rate of income tax. we will get to those, all of those. I support getting to all of those, because if you start leaving things out, I mean, there's some things that we keep out, like we don't tax medicine, we don't tax food. Some of those things probably need to be set aside so that the least able to pay for it among us are able to afford those things. But it's a process that we're going through, and we didn't leave them out for any particular reason other than we just haven't gotten there yet.
Thank you, Representative. Our next question talks about infrastructure. It'll be asked by Darius Klein.
Northern Kentucky didn't receive its fair share of infrastructure funding for Frankfurt for years. That has changed recently, however, and as a result, there are new companies moving large operations here. How would you make sure that trend continues, and what do you see as the next infrastructure needs that will help Northern Kentucky continue to expand?
I think it's you.
I think it's you.
Mr. Owens.
I
It
finished
is?
up, so.
Okay. Well, I think the biggest infrastructure need we have is the bridge. There's just no question about that, and we have not been able to figure out a solution to that that's acceptable to people. Nobody wants to pay tolls, understood. The federal government and the state government, respectively, are not going to produce the money that would be needed to replace the bridge, no matter what scheme you're looking at. And I'm not here to be offering any particular scheme or to be supporting any particular scheme. I do think as a community we've got to come to terms with that sooner or later. It continues to be a problem, a big problem, and I think that we can put as much pressure as we can on state government, put as much pressure as we can on the federal government, but I think, frankly, that that's not going to produce what's necessary in order to build a bridge without a local cost sharing, whether it's through tolls or some form of local tax. We are blessed in this community to live where we have an airport, we have a river, we have two major interstate systems coming through, kind of crossing in Cincinnati, and one being a major interstate system that runs from Florida to Canada, and does an amazing amount of commerce in terms of our country. So we're very blessed, actually, to have natural infrastructure here, which I think plays a part in people wanting to come here and do business. And I want to be clear, I do support economic development. I support economic development hugely. I mean, business provides the services and goods that people need and want. It provides the jobs that make it for an economy, allow people to achieve a standard of living and a quality of life. I am all for that. What I'm really uncomfortable with and am unrepentant for is a belief that when you look at where the benefits have gone, and I'm talking about several decades, but into the present, you know, the curve goes something like this. And down here, data from the University of Kentucky Center on Business and Economic Research, this is not a left-wing think tank, it's the University of Kentucky, shows unequivocally that people at the bottom have had no growth. They've had negative growth in income. But the people up here have had huge growth. So, you know, if you believe in trickle-down economics, that may look like a good thing. I think they've been pretty well shown to be not effective ever since Ronald Reagan. We've been looking at that for a long time. I think we need to be fairly, to create a system of fair taxation that treats people across the board and that allows people to make an income from the economic growth that allows them to participate in the economy. Can I close with one sentence? Henry Ford said, somebody asked him, why do you pay your workers so well? He said, because I want them to buy the cars they make. He understood for a robust economy, people have to be able to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Owens.
Well, I think Col might have talked less about infrastructure, more about taxes, and I just want to say, Col, I want everyone to live like a Republican. See, that's supposed to be an applause line or laugh or something. Come on, are you all paying attention? Hang with us. We're almost over, I swear.
I don't get it. Say it again.
We have not gotten our fair share for decades and decades, and you're right. We have, Darius, gotten our money this year, and that is largely because we have a government controlled by Republicans, and we are deciding to put our money where we get the most return on the investment. For years and years, our money has gone to other parts of this state. I'll never forget a phone call I got, I think 4 years ago, from Governor Beshear, who asked me to raise the gas tax because we needed another $250 million. And I said, Governor, I can save you more than $250 million. And he said, how are you going to do that? I said, get rid of the $750 million to 4-lane the Eastern, or the Mountain Parkway, a road from Winchester to Prestonsburg, I think, that is literally more cars go down Latonia Avenue, in Latonia, down Winston Pike, in front of Burlington Coat Factory, than use the 34-mile Mountain Parkway. Honest to God. That's how our road money has been spent over the years. And just to finish that story, he said, well, that's not what I'm talking about. And I said, well, you need my vote, and that's what I'm talking about. And that was the end of that conversation, and I didn't vote for the increase. We're bringing our money back up here, and we're all happy about that until, just remember, you were happy about it until the orange barrels show up, because they're going to be everywhere in the next couple of years. And we're getting money not just from the state here, but we're getting money from the federal government. The next issue is, how are we going to continue to fund our infrastructure needs? The gas tax is a dwindling source of money. I personally think we need to tax people on the amount of miles they drive, not the amount of gas they purchase. That's what they're starting to do in Washington and Oregon, those bastions of conservatism. So we need to look at how we're going to fund our infrastructure going forward if we're going to continue to be successful. But yes, we are continuing to increase our share, and we're having a lot of success with it.
Thank you, Representative. Mr. Owens, would you like to respond?
Yeah, but just very quickly, I think it is exciting that people are looking into alternatives for funding infrastructure, no question about it. In the end, it is a question of money, and the question is how you get it. I think whether it's through a gas tax or a mileage tax or whatever form of tax it is, there's going to be a need for additional resources in order to have the community we want. And that's really my theme today. Is we need resources to have the schools we want, have the university we want, to have the roads we want, etc. So it's about resources and money. Thank you.
All right, that is the end of our 8 questions there. We will have 3 minutes to close, starting with you, Representative.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Students, you were probably mandated. Parents, grandparents, teachers, everyone else, we appreciate your coming and your attention. And I'm so glad that we were able to do this. The 6 of you have done a great job, and I appreciate your all's interest. There are resources are important. And there's a lot of things we didn't get to talk about. When you're talking about infrastructure funding, when you're talking about any funding, saving money is just the same as generating money. And I was proud to write the bill and shepherd it through that repealed the prevailing wage law. And Randy Poe came to the Senate committee with me to testify on behalf of repealing the prevailing wage. And his testimony was basically this: we need 6 new schools in Boone County. And if you pass this law, it's basically the same as build 5 and get the 6th one for free. That's the sort of savings that go along with that. Fort Mitchell, as soon as we passed it, they scrapped a bid they had for roads, rebid it, same company, same spec, same everything, saved $75,000. I'd rather save you money. My opponent would rather tax you more to get that money. I'd rather grow the economy. and see if we can generate the revenue necessary to fund government expenditures that way. My opponent would rather raise your taxes. How about we try to do something different? We are trying to change Kentucky for the better. Again, the economy is booming and we are succeeding. My opponent wants more of the status quo and the way we've always done things. And I'm proud of my record. If you haven't been to my website, adamkoenig.com, check out what we've done, and I would appreciate your vote on November 6th.
Thank you, Representative. Mr. Owens.
Well, let me first thank you all for being here as well. I said at the outset, I'll say again, what a great opportunity for you to see this kind of discussion, to understand, I think, better, not just theoretically, but in actuality, hearing people talk about the different issues and why they differ and how they differ. I'm not somebody who believes in the status quo about everything at all, but I'm very concerned about how people are living in this community. You know, I talk to people in the education community who are extremely unhappy about things that took place in the legislature, both about the pensions and about education funding, who work in schools with no textbooks, who work where there's facing bankruptcy, who are not necessarily locally, but there are systems in the state that don't have the services they need for kids, where teachers are providing the materials. So they're unhappy. I'm talking to people in the police and fire world who are extremely unhappy with my opponent because he took leadership in a program on workers' compensation that cut benefits that they considered very, very important to themselves. And I've talked to a lot of people in the working world who just feel like, you know, when you do away with prevailing wage, and there have been different experiences in different school systems. You know, I don't know what Randy Poe has experienced. I do know what they've experienced in Erlanger Ellesmere. When you're taking money away from people, you're taking the prevailing wage means they're taking home $15,000, $20,000 less in a year. So you've cut them down to the working poor. And when you vote against the minimum wage, the minimum wage, by the way, for those of you who don't know, was instituted in 1938. It's been a part of our national life for 80 years. Hasn't tanked the economy, that anybody can tell, but it has protected workers along the way. It's now 60% of the poverty level. We can do better than that. At its high point, 1968, it was 98 or 99% of the poverty level. These are things that we need to look at because we do not have to sacrifice growth and progress in order to shore up the lives of working people. This is not a binary choice. It's not either or. We are smart enough, we can learn enough from history, learn enough from all the resource people around us to have our cake and eat it too, if you will, to be able to provide for everyone a more stable quality of life and standard of living while we're pursuing these other wonderful things for our community. I'm for doing that. I've had a life of service. I've been a lawyer for many, many years. I'm a school board member. I'm a law professor now and have been for about 25 years at UC and at Chase. I've been a policy advocate. I want to put those skills to work in this job, and I think I bring a lot to it. So I hope that you'll also go to my website, and I invite you to, and take a look at the issues I put out as well as my background. And thank you very much for your attendance today.
Thank you, gentlemen. That concludes the debate. Remember to go vote November 6th.
That's right.
Right. We agree on that.
Yes, we do. We were on some stuff.
Huh?
So we were on some stuff.
It's kind of fun.
Yeah, well,
So we're going to do Wednesday.